Halo Infinite dawns upon us, and while I thought this idea was well past its expiry, the trailers have led me to believe that this is the furthest from the truth. While I have my worries with how little we've seen of this game as a sequel to Halo 5, they really seem to be pushing how the story integrates with Halo Wars 2. Now, Halo Wars 2 was a bright spot after the turmoil following Halo 5's release, and that's not even to say Halo 5 is bad. I think its multiplayer is one of the best in the franchise. But as I do with most videos, this is about the story, and while it does a lot right, it completely wastes away what was inherently the most interesting thing about it: the villains. The Arbiter is a fan favourite character, and that is due in no small part to the time Halo 2 allows players to spend with him. This is something notably absent from Halo Wars 2, and is something I wish to address, and, well, attempt to amend. The antagonist had an excellent introduction. However, in hindsight with where the story went, the exposition dump about Atriox and the Banished was completely unnecessary, and really only served as a cool trailer. This information would have been served far better sprinkled throughout the story. I think this leaves a bad first impression on Isabel as a character as well. Frankly though, that's it. We don't get any more information or development on any of the three Banished leaders throughout this game, except, funnily enough, Decimus. I think it was a smart decision to leave Decimus's character relegated to gameplay moments. With the limited time devoted to cutscenes, we barely had any to stomach Atriox as it was. Decimus serves as a fine enough physical presence for the player to deal with, although he is quite short-lived. Let Valer, or the Shipmaster, was the character I was most excited for, as the relationship between the Brutes and the Elites have always provided some good drama, and the foundation of their relationship here expanded on that even further. But, unlike Decimus, we get literally nothing. The only details of this character we get is information provided outside of the game, and his brief appearance in the villain exposition dump. He even shows up in later cutscenes, but doesn't do anything of note. Of all the villains, I think this was where the game dropped the ball the most. We'll come back to him later. Now the big bad himself, Atriox. With my complaints on the exposition dump, the beginning of the game sets up his character perfectly. His fight with the Red Team might have been one of the coolest cutscenes in any Halo game ever, maybe only bested by the one with Jerome later in the game. He is intimidating, he is smart as well as strong, and provides a further insight into exploring the alien species separate from the Covenant. From there though, Atriox disappears from the game. The whole marketing campaign for Halo Wars 2 was to know your enemy, and they really doubled down on this dynamic between Atriox and Cutter, but in the game, these two don't really have any interactions with each other. I'm not saying they needed to meet face to face, or even via communications, but there was no mention of the crew of the Spirit of Fire learning more information about Atriox as the game progresses, and how the Banished work, or vice versa. All we get is the information about the Portal Network, and other things that are only there for gameplay purposes. Forget your enemy, should have been the tagline. Now before I get to my suggestions on how things could have gone, I will note that a Banished campaign I'm sure would have resolved a lot of these issues. While I'm sure making a whole second campaign to be released with launch would have been a full-on endeavour, I'm kinda gutted, not gonna lie. But nevertheless, we are here today to make the presentation of the villains more tolerable. So, let's get started. We're going to start by splitting the campaign into 3 sections, each with a focus on each respective villain. First is about pushing back Decimus and establishing a solid foothold on the Ark and shutting down the Portal Network they've set up. Second is about the mission to destroy their capital ship with a focus on the Shipmaster. And the final one is centered on the Halo and Atriox pulling out all the stops to prevent you from enacting your plan. The game needs either more Covenant-centered cutscenes or dialogue and gameplay. I think it will be great to spend each of these 3 sections with the respective villains taunting you, as they did in part with Decimus and Atriox, and use it to help us get to know these characters. As the campaign progresses, you maybe see them crack under pressure a bit more, or express more emotion directly at you. An alternative idea is to have Isabel hacking into their communications, where we hear conversations they have with each other, similar how Cortana does in Halo 2. The sections with Decimus interacting with Atriox and Shipmaster can show how the 3 initially underestimate the humans, and overestimate themselves. But through that we can also learn about the trials and tribulations that led to where the Banished are now. The second section would let Valer can flesh out the relationship between him and Atriox and maybe even splinter that somewhat. Through the actions of the Spirit of Fire, perhaps we can see the cracks in the Elite and Brute unity and their primal hatred of one another starts to come through. The third section would leave us with mostly Atriox, as he takes matters into his own hands to handle the Spirit of Fire. Now, this is more of a personal preference, but something I was always excited to see going into the game was that dynamic between the Brutes and the Elites. And if anything, I was even hoping to focus on Let Valer as maybe a central vessel for the Banished, to the point where maybe we even see the Elites defect, as they did in Halo 2/3. It would be a bit repetitive, but I kinda like the idea of these two factions, like, just never getting along with one another. Or, completely flip it on its head, and maybe establish to the audience that that may potentially be something that's going to happen, but then pull the rug out from under them, and we really just cement this interesting relationship between Let Valer and Atriox. While cutscenes are a big part of video game storytelling, dialogue and gameplay is just as strong, and I think it's an area many games underestimate, as if used properly, allows opportunity to explore characters in far greater ways than any film or book could. Look at games like Borderlands, where we got one of the most iconic villains of all time, and most of that was through dialogue playing out during gameplay. This area allows the game to include conversations and monologues that don't exactly have anything to do with progressing the narrative, and just have fun with these characters being who they are, and we get to enjoy them as well. While these amendments might seem a bit pointless, given how long ago the game came out, and with Infinite right around the corner, I wanted to discuss how the medium of video games can utilise character development and exploration in far more ways than other mediums. Halo Wars 2 introduced some great characters, however failed to retain its momentum as the story progressed, ultimately making them seem more like cutouts that are only there to drive the plot. I certainly hope Halo Infinite fixes this if it wants to bring Atriox and Let Valer back into the fold as iconic staples of the Halo story that they really deserve to be. But we'll just have to wait until launch to find that out.
And hang it from the rear view like a
with collateral damage.
Sorry.